Hello! Oh, lots of highs. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Happy Monday. Hope you guys are doing as well as you can on a Monday, as well as you can in some crazy Monday. My name is Laura Walton. I'm going to be fidgeting with this because this is what I usually do. I haven't seen y'all in a long time. I haven't seen some of you ever. Welcome. I assume you can hear me because no one's saying I can't hear you, so that's good. Anyway, I think the last time I was here was like November, maybe even October, but I'm back. And today we're going to be talking about some figurative language. So some things that some of you like, some of you that you don't. Maybe hopefully you do like it. So let's get started. I'm going to share something with you. Again, I hope you're having a lovely, lovely Monday. Hopefully your weather's at least nice. Our weather's been gorgeous. Actually, today was not gorgeous. I don't know why I said that. It's kind of cold and cloudy, but it wasn't raining, so it's been okay. The weather's been kind of nice, though. Okay, besides today. So, like I said, we're going to be starting some looking at figurative language today and function. In the fall, I did a live stream that was about not literary devices, there we go, which is some of the stuff is going to be very similar in this particular PowerPoint, but there was some different stuff in there, and today I would like to go more in depth into actual figurative language stuff. So yeah, so you can see the PowerPoint just fine. Okay, so let's get to figurative language. So we're going to do a couple different things. So figurative language review game, do a little bit of review. I'll explain the so-called rules. The prizes are all in your head. You can imagine that I'm handing you a giant trophy if you'd like to, whatever floats your boat. We'll play a little review. I'll talk about the difference between figurative language versus literary devices. Why figurative language in the first place? So why do we use it? Why is it going to be on the exam? Why is it important? And basically then it moves into how it's used on the exam. So what does it look like in the multiple choice section? Then what does it look like in free response and how to tackle it? So sometimes when people see figurative language and those things, they're like, oh no, what do I do with it? I'm going to tell you how to do that. And then we'll look at some devices that are little ones that you may or may not have heard of. Some that I certainly hadn't heard of until I taught AP, and some I hadn't heard of until I got to AP Lit. So some fun ones to impress your friends and family if they're weird like me and you. Probably just me. Okay. So let's go to the stuff. And again, ask questions as you have them. All right, we're going to play a little game. Can y'all see the PowerPoint just fine? Is it big enough for y'all? Does anyone not see? Good, fabulous. You guys are awesome. It's so weird not hearing anybody, but it's good that you guys are like, yes, immediately. So we're going to play a little game. And before I actually play the game, I would like to see an emoji from you. And I want to see, and I believe I've asked this before, but you hear figurative language or you see it, give me an emoji, how that feels. For example, for me, I totally have a unicorn emoji because I love it. I love figurative language. I get excited about it. But you can give me a poop emoji if you hate it, or whatever you want. I see a thumbs up from Santiago. I see a grimace face. That's fine. What else you got? Be honest. Okay, I like it. And give me ones that are, even if you're like, oh, she won't understand that, like, those are my favorite ones. Aha, the rolly eyes. Yes, a heart. And the upside down smile. It's like, just to make your English teacher happy, but it's like, whatever. Well, good. I like the mixed responses. That's usually what I get. You can keep putting them in there if you want. Got a little bit of happy face, kind of like, eh. All right, we're going to play a little game. And this is, if you were with me with my other live stream, the last one, it's very similar. It's just got different examples. So I'm going to give you an example from literature and some of them that have appeared on the exam. And you are just going to tell me basically what kind of figurative language it represents. So it's going to be like a quotation. And also just to refresh our memories, I got 3 different faces there, kind of, okay, I like it. Nice. I like the honesty. Anyway, back to figurative language. So you're going to, you'll tell me what kind of figurative language is. So to review just a little bit before we do that, just name examples of figurative language in that chat. So we can see them, get them in our heads, get into that kind of mindset. Yes, simile, good. Just keep them coming. Anaphora. Ooh, we got advanced already. Awesome. Metaphor. Personification. Beautiful. Yeah. Yep, I was going to say everyone's going to say metaphor. Metaphor is the most common one you're going to see, too, so it's a good thing. Especially extended metaphor, too. What else you got? Metaphor. Alliteration. Good. Yes, imagery. That's a really common one, too. Hyperbole. Wonderful. Exaggeration. Diction is what you're going to see that's going to give you some of that stuff. It's going to give you tone. Diction's kind of like the word choice that's being used to make the figurative language more. Oxymoron, good. Syntax. Syntax is kind of like diction too, where it's like the word order and the it's not really figurative language, but it's definitely a piece of syntax will create figurative language. So you want to keep those things in mind. Yeah, allusion, wonderful. Referring to something. Cool. You can put them in there, but now let's play our little game. Anecdote, yes, yeah, anecdote. Well, anecdote can be a form of figurative language. It's something, it's like a little story in there. So I think that would be more of a literary device, and I'll talk about the difference in just a moment. But it's going to be used pretty interchangeably too. Cool. And again, if you're looking at some of these, you're like, what is that? Ask the question. I'll try to remember all of them. Some of them, I have to like look them up too. So don't worry, English teachers are kind of the same as y'all too. Let's play this game though. Okay. So I'll give you an example, and also some of the examples, actually most of them will be more than one. So if someone says one automatically like it's a metaphor, oh darn, I didn't get it. It could also be imagery too, so it'll be multiple ones. And you're not going to lose any points for real on this. All right, here we go. So here's your first example. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Ooh, asyndeton, that's a good question. We'll put that in the question box. Yes, we got personification there. Any others? You could put it in if you're like, I gotta answer. Go ahead and answer it. Yeah, we got some personification there. Okay, yeah, all right, we'll leave it at that. Pretty sure that's the one that I put there. There may be another one that I'm trying to remember, but it's like personification is the major one that I got there, so cool. All right, here's the second one. Conscience is man's compass. Ah, lovely. Well done. Yes. Good, it is a metaphor. Metaphors don't always have to be these kind of complicated imagery things. It's just like something is something else that it's not. Cool. All right, let's do the third one. Symbolism. Ooh, I like that too. So yeah, so the compass could be the symbol of conscience. Okay, I like it. I'll take it. All right, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Yes, we got imagery there. Well done. How many of you are getting kind of mad? They're like, oh, everyone's typing faster than me. Give me the mad face if that's happening to you. Personification. Okay. Yeah, there's the mad face. I knew it. It's okay. Again, the points don't matter. Like, whose line is it anyway? It's all right. Here's a chocolate cake for those of you who can't type as fast. I'm a baker too. I don't have any cake for you today, though. I have imaginary cake, though. Okay. So yes, so that's more imagery than anything. Cool. A room without books is like a body without a soul. I love that quote. But it's also a form of... There we go. Hey, Julia, you did it. Oh, you won't... Nope, Santiago beat you. Sorry. You almost got it. See, I had the same reaction. Santiago just barely beat you. Yes, it is simile. A room without books is like a body without a soul. Yes. All right, let's go to number 5. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet. Who can do it first? Who will get it? Ooh. All right, yeah. So now this is one that kind of starts breaking off as more than one. Yeah, it is imagery. What else is it? I wouldn't say it's exaggerating anything, but I like the guess. Good. This is not hyperbole. I wouldn't say it's exaggerating. Think of the sound. This is more of a sound device. Yes, so what is, yes, it uses S a lot of times, so what is that called? There we go. We got alliteration. And so let's see if you get this too. If alliteration is using a consonant sound a lot, what is that called? Do you know it? Not that this is like vital, but yeah, there we go. We're consonants. So that's, yeah, cool. So we got imagery and alliteration. All right, let's do number 6. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. This one, again, is more than one of them. I'm looking for a sound device here, and I'm also looking for a general literary device or figurative language. Symbolism. Go with a different one. Let's see, because maybe as the poem is extended, it could be a symbol, but not at this point. I like it. Old age should burn something. I am purposely getting a little bit harder as I go. And you can go real simple too. I'll give you a moment. The silence with typing is even worse. Like with the classroom, you're like, at least not everybody's staring at you when you're waiting for the answer. Personification, okay. It's giving at least old age something else that is not necessarily what old age does. So yeah, that could be something that it is. You could say for this one, actually, I'm gonna give a couple more seconds before I say anything. So I want to see if anyone, yeah, and I also don't want you to be afraid to answer, because again, I'm not giving you any score here. So if you get it wrong, who cares? This isn't the AP exam. This is a live stream. No one will ever remember what you said. Hopefully you'll remember what I said, but they don't want to remember what you typed in the chat. Okay, so this one can be a couple different things. Hyperbole. So it could be exaggerating maybe what old age does. So that's a solid guess. I would say, so this one has this again, you can always go pretty simple and you can say imagery. If it's putting a picture in your head in some way, then it's imagery. Like a metaphor can be imagery, simile can be imagery. If you go with the sound device, this one is a little bit harder to spot than alliteration. So this one is called assonance, and that's when a vowel sound is repeated multiple times. So age, rave, day. It is harder to spot because we just don't spot vowels as much as we do consonants. S's are a lot easier to hear. Yeah, so those are my major ones that I got there. But I like some of the, yeah. Personification is probably pretty close to it too. All right, let's do number 7. This one might be easier. It hushes, it shushes, it flitter twitters. This is one of my favorites. What you got? What you got? Spelling doesn't count. Yes. It is the sound effects word. There we go. And you spelled it correctly. Well done. Onomatopoeia. Yes. Not quite rhyme. Although shush and no, you're right. Never mind. You are absolutely correct. It is rhyming. Hushes and shushes. Yes, that would be internal rhyme. Well done. And flitter twitter. So rhyme and onomatopoeia. Yeah, onomatopoeia doesn't always have to be zap or anything like that. It can be words that sound like what they're doing, like hush. Yeah, consonants. Ooh. Got some hush, shush. Yeah, you know what? It does have a little bit of consonants in there. And I guess it also has a little bit of assonance in there too. Hush, ush, ush. Nice. See, you start catching it when you get it. All right, let's see the last one. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. This is, no, I'm not going to say it because usually some people get it immediately and some people don't. So we'll see what happens. Repetition. Okay, there's a little bit of repetition in there. There is a particular literary device or piece of figurative language that repeats things and it makes things sound very similar to each other. Oxymoron. No, not you're kind of close, but it's not oxymoron because they're not. They are the opposite, but it's not quite that. For whatever reason, it's not the definition of it. I would say if things are kind of running same way with each other, but are a little bit something opposite, yeah. Some things that are going opposite of each other in literature. What is that called? Not irony. Irony is something with opposite, like the opposite reaction you have. I'll give you a couple more seconds. I'll put you out of your misery in a moment. I just want to see if someone will get it. And this is something you may see this on the exam. You're like, oh, I probably need to know what it is. And once you get it, you're like, oh yeah, of course that's what it is. Or maybe you won't, and maybe you don't know it, and that is okay too. Because I didn't like it in class when everyone's like, oh, and I'm like, what? How did you know that? Okay, so this one is parallelism. Oh, antithesis. Ah. Like the opposite of something. So yeah, parallelism. Oh, thanks, Santiago. Parallelism, yes. So it's like it's two things that are very, very similar, but they have like maybe one or a couple words changed. Yes, very good, very good. Parallelism, or I believe this is. I have to refresh my memory on anaphora, but I believe that is what it is. I want to definitely say it's parallelism. Yes, wonderful. So here's your answers. And again, this PowerPoint will be available to you, so if you want to review it, you can do that after the stream. It will be available by tomorrow at this time. So there you go. Well done. So I did a little bit harder this time. Last time it was a little bit easier, I think. All right, so let's talk about figurative language. So if you've got questions as we go, keep asking those questions, put them in the chat or put them in the question box, and I'll check it periodically. All right, so let's talk a little bit of difference between figurative language and literary devices. There really isn't much difference. Still getting parallelism. So you'll hear me, and you've already heard me like 3 times use them interchangeably, because your teacher is probably doing it too. They're slightly different, but you will often hear someone say, use literary devices in this, or find the figurative language, find the literary devices. Really, the difference is like one is one of the other. So figurative language is language used to create an image. Figuratively, what a great definition. But it's basically describing something that often not without directly stating what it is or it isn't. So things like similes state what something is by describing what something is like. Or a metaphor says what something is by saying it's something else. Or imagery is just describing what something is. So like you might describe love as a litter box. It's terrible and it smells. Or love is like a litter box. Or my father is like Superman, or a tree is, I don't know, flowing in the wind. So these things that are describing things to put an image in your head. Versus a literary device is just a structure used by writers to convey ideas to readers. So figurative language is a type of literary device. It's just more specific. That's why your teacher uses it interchangeably. That's why I end up using it interchangeably, because in my head, I'm like, oh, they're the same, but they're not quite. Is that terribly important for the AP exam? No, just in general, if you're trying to think of figurative versus just literary. Okay. Do I have a question? No, I do not. Good. Okay. Why do we use figurative language? Number one, we don't actually think in literal language most of the time. We don't communicate that way either. If you start really noticing the way you talk to people and the way you communicate, you use a lot more metaphor and simile than you probably think you do. Yeah. It's also kind of boring if you're just straight up literal language, and it's not often used in literature. So your test and your questions are almost always going to ask you about figurative language, because that's mostly what literature, and especially fiction, is made up of. Again, once you start looking for it, you're like, oh, you're right, that is the case. Most of the time, literal language is found in very, very dry texts, or very, like, maybe history books, but I don't want to say history books are dry. It's like a lot of, or like scientific reports have to be very, very literal. Also, so the audience understands better what's trying to be said, right? Yes. So if you're, I guess in the case, I guess my question, Lucy, is if you're talking about using figurative language so they understand it, or so that literal language is being used to understand it. I guess it just depends. That was not a question. That was me just restating my head. I would say using literal language maybe to get a point across really, really specifically. Okay, figurative language, yeah. And that goes into number 3. Yeah, so the audience understands better what's trying to be said. Yeah, especially when you're talking about something that maybe someone doesn't understand, like a new concept. We use things to compare them to. So we're like, oh, it's like this, so I can understand it. And we don't just do that in literature. We do that in science too. Like, oh, this new bug is like a spider. Or this chemical is like acid. It's what we do on a daily basis. Really good point. Thanks, Lucy. And then finally, your writing is stronger, more mature, and more interesting with expert use of figurative language. People just like to read it that way because it's, again, it goes back to number 1 and 2. We don't think that way, and we also don't use it because it's kind of boring. Just the human brain doesn't work that way. You like my cat pictures, by the way? I worked really hard finding them. Not really, I took like 5 minutes, but I love cats. Anyway, here's a majestic cat for you. Yes. Okay, someone likes cats. I bet some of you are like, no, dog people all the way. It's fine. Dogs are all right. Anyway, so some examples. I figured of like just the terms themselves. What does my shirt say? Oh, I'll show you. It does have a cat on it. It says, let's eat kittens, let's eat, comma, kittens. Punctuation saves lives. Because English teacher, a student got this for me. Isn't that excellent? I love it. It is the best and is absolutely appropriate for today. I love it. I didn't even try to do that. I just wore it this morning. Yes. I didn't even notice my t-shirt could be seen. Last time no one could see my t-shirt, so yes, awesome. I'm glad you'll like it. That's funny. Okay, these are examples of figurative language terms. So these are ones that describe like do the thing that I said, that they describe something by describing something else, or they give imagery or whatever it is. If you see some on here, I will be going through a lot of these at the end, but if you see some on here like, what the heck is that? Put that in the question box. You can say, what is this? What is zeugma? Or what is synecdoche? Whatever. If you don't know what it is, put it in the question box. But I'm going to go, like I said, I'm going to go over a lot of these. And there's more. This is not an all-exhaustive list. Oh yes, zeugma. Nice German word. I love that majestic cat. He's making me so happy right now. Pastoral. So I assume, Jason, these are ooh, I got some questions. So I'm going to put them as questions in the question box. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go, like I said, at the end, I'm going to go over those. And I'm determined to get to them. Last time I didn't get to the ones I wanted to, and I'm doing it this time. Okay. So you might be thinking to yourself, you might be like this cat, you're like, cool, all right, literary devices, whatever. And I did it again, figurative language literary devices, and I wrote it on here. See, I did it again. It's okay. So how are literary devices used on the AP exam? And then I guess I'm using this interchangeably because the exam will say literary devices. Sometimes it'll say figurative language, but I have most often seen it say literary device. So I'm going to tell you how it's actually used. So let's start with multiple choice. Let me make sure your questions are about good. Okay, so your questions are all about the things I'm already going to talk about. Wonderful. I have made things toggle. Okay, there we go. So multiple choice questions. Here are how they will appear. So these are actually the question stems that you might see. You may have already seen on some of your practice stuff. So for example, what literary device is being used in the phrase blank? So sometimes they'll straight up give you the phrase from the thing you're reading and say, tell me the literary device. Or it might be, which of the following example of this literary, which of the following is example of a metaphor? Or of, and usually the ones that I have seen are usually more of the simpler devices, like it'll say metaphor, simile, and it won't go like, which one is an example of zeugma? That I've not seen that yet, but I'm going to tell you what a zeugma is later anyway. Or it might say, this phrase is a metaphor that compares what to what, or it'll say like, which of the following is a metaphor that does this thing? Or what does the author compare to in the following literary device? So lots of different ways that you might see it on the exam. I think there's one more bullet. Yes, there is. Okay. And what is the purpose of this literary device in the passage? So it'll give you an example. So those are the stems you might see. I'm sure you have already seen that before too. Maybe you haven't. I don't know. So I'm going to give you tips for how to do it now. It's March, you got time, and you hopefully have been doing some of it since the beginning, but you know what, you still, again, you've got time, you're good. I'll tell you how to do it before the exam and then what to do during the exam as well. So before the exam, my biggest piece of advice to you is to study familiar figurative language terms. So don't get caught in the exam forgetting what a metaphor is. I mean, sometimes people get very, very nervous, but just remember to yourself, you have known a lot of these literary devices since you were like in 2nd or 3rd grade. Some of you, I shouldn't say everybody, because maybe your teacher didn't teach you that, but you probably have at least heard of them for a long time. So just breathe and keep studying those ones that you know. Look for lots and lots and lots of examples, because sometimes things are a metaphor that don't look like the ones you're used to. So just study and just review them. My second big piece of advice is to learn new figurative language terms. So that's why you're here today too. I'm going to tell you some new ones. What I make my kids do is a vocabulary journal, and my goodness, they either love it or they hate it, but they say it is helpful. And this is especially good for figurative language terms, new ones. And this is, I made them write it in a journal, but you could do it like on a Google Doc or however you best remember things. Because I know that my generation, we write, but yours may be more of the like, I'll text it, or I remember things because I typed it. So you keep a vocab journal by giving the term and the definition of something. So let's say you learned Zeugma today. I'm going to use Zeugma a lot because I just like saying it. So you write down Zeugma, you tell what the definition is, you give the source, like the sentence that you saw the definition in, or the word, and then you give an original example. And so in that way, your brain is working to get that new term, get that definition, see it where you actually saw it, and might be on the exam or an exam question, and then your brain coming up with a new one so that you can remember it a little bit better. So you're just making your brain work on different ways. It works. It made my kids remember stuff, so hopefully it'll help you a little bit. And then, how many of you are writers? Give me like a thumbs up if you like to write. And it can be either fiction, nonfiction, it can be whatever. You write in a journal every day, or you write a blog, or you write, or even like you talk to yourself and you do like a, I don't know, you do a podcast. What do you do? Give me a thumbs up or a smiley if you write, or something appropriate that I know what you're talking about. And while I wait for those, hopefully some of you are writing something every day. It doesn't have to be, you can even say I write every day for my class because my teacher makes me, but hopefully like on your own. Another big piece of advice, of course, sometimes we'll like to, okay, so good, reading is good. Reading is going to help you more, but writing is also going to help you get those things out of your head. So that's good too. So if you're not reading every day, you should read every day. Yeah. So write examples of figurative language regularly. That will help you remember them because like, oh, I remember writing an example of that, but read and write. Read first, then write. So that helps a little bit. So if today you see some examples of figurative language, like, I don't know what that is, try writing some examples or looking them up too and writing your own, because that does help. Especially if you can surprise yourself sometimes with what you can write, or it can just be really bad. You know what's really fun is writing really bad poetry with terrible metaphors. Try it sometime. It's awful and great. Don't make anybody read it though. Or I don't know, maybe you have fun doing that. Okay, so that's before the exam. That's like now. That's like, hopefully you've been doing a little bit of this beforehand, and now you're like, okay, this is something I could be doing, especially if you're at home a little bit more. You might have a little more time to do a vocab journal. But you also may have, hopefully, more time. Reading, again, is the most important thing you can do. So read, 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 read. Okay, so here's during the exam. So you're now sitting, taking the exam. Breathe. Wonderful. I love that question. I will get to it, Sonia, in a moment. Wonderful. Okay. So tackling the figurative language in multiple choice on the exam. So during the exam, so I would go through the questions first. If you're not already in the habit of doing that, I would do that for this specific purpose. A lot of times they'll say like in line 12, blank, 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 and they'll ask you a question. Before you even start reading the passage, I would go ahead and mark those passages so you know kind of to look for, not just going back out of context to look for what the question's asking you, but you're looking at like line 12 in context so that when you have to go back to it in a question, you're like, I already marked it really, really well. So you know what you can annotate really quickly. So mark the phrases that have examples before you read. Go through those questions, mark like line 12, line 10 through 16, whatever they're asking you to do. Number 2, don't freak out on familiar choices. I will tell you why in a moment. Because actually, I'll tell you right now, because you can use process of elimination, and a lot of times the answer is the simple one, which is nice. And if it's not, then it's probably the only one that you don't know, which you can do by process of elimination. So the more you study, the better you'll be at it. But again, you can at least narrow your chances of getting something right if you are like in this kind of brain fart mode on the exam. And then finally, cover up the adjectives and the modifiers. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. And I see a lovely, yes, wonderful question. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and I may answer that in a second. I don't want to read it yet. Okay. Yes, I will get Santiago. I'm going to get your question like now, in just a moment. Okay. So here's how to do the thing with like, so I'm going to go ahead and get to Santiago's question so I can get it on there. So the question is, what can you do if there are more than 2 unfamiliar choices and you already did process of elimination? Okay. Oh, beautiful. I knew that would happen too. We got some more questions. Okay. So here's what this last part is, covering up the adjectives and modifiers, because a lot of times we can get to this question of, well, you've got two unfamiliar choices on there. So one of the things I'll say is right now, since it's now March, I would again study the literary terms that you know really well and then looking at new ones so you can kind of prevent this from happening more as much as you can. But sometimes it happens and you're like, I can't possibly remember all these terms when I'm trying to do all these other things. Totally get it. Here's what you can do. So one of the best things you can do for yourself, and this is something that'll make probably some of you are like, oh, what is this question? Some of you are asking these questions like, oh my God, what in the world? Paradoxical hyperbole? Gross. One of the best things you can do is cover, so I'm going to put this on the screen. I'm going to put my hand here. Take your hand and cover up the first word of all of them so that you are only left with the figurative language piece. So now, if you do that, you are left with hyperbole, metaphor, syllogism, reasoning, and irony. You probably already know what a metaphor is. It is something or comparing without using like or as. You probably know what a hyperbole is. So you've got two there that you're like, okay, cool, I know those two. And I love this. I love these questions. Keep them coming, keep them coming. So you probably already know that. Then you're kind of get these last three here. So irony, this is probably one hopefully you've been working with too. So let's say you're like, you know three of them and you're stuck with syllogism and reasoning. Your brain, don't even look at circular, knowing that reasoning, if the thing's not reasoning anything, cross it out. If it's not what those things are, cross them out, because those other words may be actually just there to confuse you. So that often gets rid of a lot of your choices by covering up those first modifiers. Then if you're stuck with something like metaphor and syllogism, if you know it's not a metaphor, then circle syllogism, even if you don't know what it is, because if you know it's not any of the others, it is the answer. So hopefully that kind of sort of answers your question. Covering up those modifiers really helps. Yeah, totally. You are so welcome. Unfortunately, sometimes it just happens that way, and so hopefully this will at least get your get the process of elimination a little bit better. I have tons of questions here. These are wonderful. So I'm actually going to go through some of these right now. Oh goodness, if I don't scroll down too hard. Okay. All right, so I have the question here. Is it necessary to know the definition of syllogism before the AP exam? Well, that question did come from a previous AP exam, so yeah, necessary, good to know, yes. Necessary 100%, no. Because as you also saw there too, if you happen to know like a lot of the other ones, or you cut out those modifiers, you don't have to, there's no way you can study every single literary device, and you're not going to remember all of them, and that's okay. But starting to study now, just trying to narrow down like the number of things that you don't know is a good idea, but you don't necessarily have to know. I am going to tell you what a syllogism is later though. It is not, and I'll actually get to another question here. So the other question here from Natalie is, what are the most common literary devices that show up on the exam? I'm going to say metaphor is probably your most common one. I would say the most common ones that show up are the ones you probably already know. Metaphor, imagery, extended metaphor, simile, personification. They're going to use a lot of those. Some of the more complex ones are going to appear. But most of the time you're looking at the ones that are more common because those are the ones that more commonly appear in books. So I don't want to say like, no, none of these crazy ones are going to appear. You never know that. But the ones that I have seen the most commonly on multiple choice and free response are the more common ones that you know. So that may help. Breathe. It'll be okay. And if I don't actually answer your question as thoroughly as you want, let me know. Ask it again. Okay, and I got another question here. So all the ones that are about like ones that have been on here, I'll get to those. So here's another question. What are good resources that give comprehensive overviews of literary devices? So, I have a website. I will put the website on the notes for tomorrow for the live stream. I think I have my own like things as well that I've made for my students, so I can also put that in the notes for the live stream. I will put some links to good literary device resources. A lot of times you can also Google them and say like, what is the definition of this? But there are better websites than others, so I'll put those in the notes for that. So I can't answer it quite now because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll get to it. And as I said, you can access this for free afterwards. So cool. Hopefully I'm answering your questions. You are so welcome. I love helping y'all. It is awesome. Makes me feel so much, so it makes me feel good. Okay. So that's how to do that, multiple choice. Okay, let's get to the free response, unless anyone else has any lingering questions about the multiple choice. But I don't think you do. If you do, just ask the question. But I'm gonna go ahead and move on. All right, free response. So you're most often using figurative language to help you describe a theme and its relation to the work as a whole. So like I said, you're going to use figurative language whether you like it or not, because it's going to be there because humans use figurative language. It's going to appear in it, even if they don't ask you to use it, but they almost always do. They say you should use literary devices in your response. Sometimes they'll actually give you a laundry list of devices to consider. I'll show you a couple of examples of that. You've probably seen in your practice free responses that they will ask you those things and give you a list. You don't have to use the ones they suggest to you. You can, and if you recognize them in there, you should, because you know if they put it in the question, then it's definitely in the passage, but you don't have to. And it doesn't mean that those are the only devices in there either. So if you're like, I don't know what that is, I don't know what they're asking me to use, then don't use it. Don't freak out. You'll be okay. But I'll say it again. Like the first one, you're going to need to use literary devices on there. And this time I'm using literary devices because it's not just figurative language. It can be anything. It can be irony too. It can be things that are not necessarily figurative, but they are literary devices. So you're going to have to use them. You got to find them. You can't get away from it. That's why I'm here. Okay. So here are some of the questions. And I'll give you a Q1, a Q2, and a Q3 that shows you what they look like and where this is appearing. So this is from College Board. By the way, if you haven't done it yet and you don't know, collegeboard.org, if you go, even if you type in AP Lit released questions into Google, you will get the free response questions for free. You can look at past exams. If you're not doing that, that's one of the best ways to practice too. This is where I get the questions anyway. So this one has, in a well-organized essay, analyze the speaker's complex portrayal of the landlady, and this is all from last year. And then it'll give you this list. You may wish to consider such elements as imagery, selection of detail, and tone. Again, you don't have to use any of these, but if they're there and you see them, use them. You can use 1, 2, or 3 of them, or you can use none of them, and you can use something else. You can go off and be a rebel. Same thing here. So it says things, and again, this is from last year's exam, so this is pretty close. It'll give you this list of devices: style, tone, and selection of detail. You can choose to use that. You cannot choose to use that. Those are pretty broad too. Selection of detail is pretty broad. And then finally, the Q3. This one does not do, this one doesn't do the laundry list as much. I love saying laundry list, it's fun. Yeah. This one's more of the theme, but even though, and this goes with this too, even if it doesn't say to use literary devices, you should. So even in the Q3 when it doesn't, you should remember some literary device that's used in the book that you're choosing. It doesn't have to be a quotation because a lot of times you don't remember the quotations, but you should remember like, oh, okay, I remember when especially the author uses it a lot. If it's a lot of metaphor in there, then remember that and put that in your response. The more you do that, and the more you explain that well, the better your score will be. Just because it shows that you understand it a little bit on a deeper level. If that makes sense. So those are examples. That's what it looks like. Okay. So you want to make it work for you. You don't want to work for figurative language. So here's how you make it work for you. I love making things work for me because I don't have to do as much work. So you do want to do the following things. Always, always, always in your response, in the free response, you want to explain how the examples answer the prompt or support your thesis. So you don't want to put, this is a simile and leave it as is. You want to say, this example is a simile that does this. And you also want to explain why the author chose a particular bit of figurative language. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But you want to get to the how and the why. If you've ever been with me before, you know I love my how and my why. I don't like the what as much because the what is what it's what you've been doing like in your not AP classes. Now you're ready for the how and the why. What you don't want to do is just define the figurative language term in your essay unless it directly supports your argument, which doesn't happen very often. So don't say that something is a simile, which is describing something using like, or don't do that. That wastes time. You don't want things that waste time because you don't have a lot of time. You want things that make you go quickly. And you don't want to just point out that the example is an example of a particular term. How many of you have done that before? You just you found a metaphor and you're like, this is a metaphor, and you wrote it down to pad your paper, because I know I've done it before. I want to see. I can just be the only one, but I doubt that I am. I wanted to impress my teacher, so I wanted my teacher to know that I knew what that metaphor was. So I said, this is a metaphor, or I said, this is hyperbole. But I didn't say why, and I didn't say how it was working. I just wanted them to know. You don't have to prove that. They know you know what a metaphor is. They know you're smart. They want to see what you can do with it. So here's what you don't want to do. So here's some sample evidence. By the way, I also have a lovely study guide with Fiveable that is about looking into short stories and also drama and longer fiction that goes into depth about how to use these support sentences too. And again, it's free, so go to Fiveable and find it. It's great, or I'll try to put in the show notes too. Anyway, so this is an example from the Story of an Hour, which is a great story to look at for this stuff too. It's only 2 pages long. So if you're pressed for time, 2 pages. It's free. It may have just, so I question, yeah, so I never saw the study guide in Fiveable. Where is that? It may have just appeared because I think I just got a notice that it was published. So it might be there or it might just be coming there. So it will be there very soon. Oh, beautiful question. Long. Love it. So yes, so if I find the link to the study guide, I will put it in my show notes. I keep saying show notes like this is the Laura show, this live stream notes. And I will get to your question in just a moment, Sonia. Actually, no, I'll get to it now because that's a good question. Okay, so the question is, do you get more points if you correctly incorporate less common literary devices? So if you, a student, impressively discussed an uncommon literary device on an essay and you wrote about a common literary device, would my score be lower than the other students? No. I would not say that. I would say, especially if, I mean, no, I wouldn't say just on face value, even if they were both explained just as well. Your key there is to point out a literary device and explain it well and to explain why it works. So someone else, I'm going to use Zeugma again, someone else pointing out the Zeugma is not necessarily going to be better than you pointing out the metaphor and explaining how this author used it and why it works and why it's like answering the question. So no. So, and you can get a very good score. You can get a 5 on the exam just explaining metaphors and similes and imagery and things that are very simple. So you don't have to know the things. You just it might be better for you, again, if you see those multiple choice questions where things are complex, or you're like really noticing, you're like, oh, that would really help my argument. I noticed something that maybe I wouldn't have noticed before, then it might give you a little more confidence also on the exam. So no, you don't get more points for that as far as I know. So hopefully that answers your question. Yes, hopefully. I would say Story of an Hour is pretty commonly used for AP. I used it in my classroom because it was, again, it's 2 pages long. It's great for it. So you can use it. It's like, it's a super dense story. So you don't want to do these things. You are welcome. So you don't want to just say a simile is a comparison between two unlike things, which is what Chopin uses in this line. Don't do that. And I put all these things because I have seen my AP students sometimes do these. Like they just want to pad their essay. You don't pad your essay because, again, you don't have the time to do it. And it's not, the reader doesn't want to read through it either. Your teacher doesn't want to read through it either. And you don't want to write it either. Honestly, your hand does not have enough power to do that. So don't write that. Don't just say the description of Louise, an example of a simile used by Chopin, unless you're going to keep going further. And that sentence better be twice as long. Or you don't want to just say the simile compares Louise to a goddess of victory, unless you're going into more detail with that. You don't want to just leave it as is, basically. You do want to make it look like some of these things. So here's the same evidence. So you'll notice these sentences are like 2 or 3 times as long as those other ones. So instead of just saying that this is a simile, you say she uses the simile to compare her main character to do this as she leaves the room, believing she is free from the shackles of marriage. So this is explaining how the simile works. This is an okay one. Hopefully you're going into more detail about it. So this explains the what and the how the comparison is appropriate in context and how it might tie into the thesis. But you want the why is better. And again, if I go too fast through it, go back through it. Same thing. So then, and it depends, the reason why I don't have like a really comprehensive thing is it just depends on what your thesis is and what you're being asked to do with it. But anyway, so you're using the simile. Louise, rather than follow social customs and grieve her husband's death, walks like a goddess of victory over the stifling institution of marriage. So there's your how. But she is just that, like a goddess of victory rather than metaphorically being one, and will lose that image at her husband's arrival. So that's how you use the figurative language to your advantage to explain something. Why you would use a simile versus a metaphor. I might use a metaphor to make a stronger connection, whereas I might use a simile to make a less strong connection, a weaker connection on purpose, which is kind of cool. So think about that if you're ever writing like poetry or you're reading things, like why would an author choose to do these things? Which is what I'm going into now. So some reasons why you might use the following, or why an author would use the following. So I'm going to go with the simple ones, because again, you can do well on the exam just going through the simple stuff. So an author might use a simile to make light comparisons, whereas they would use a metaphor to make heavier or stronger comparisons, simply because by saying something is like something rather than it is just a weaker connection. Like, again, I'll go with that. Love is like a litter box. Like, oh, that's gross. And love is a litter box. So like, whoa, gross-er. So it's just making that stronger connection. If the author's using personification versus something else, they may be highlighting human traits. They might be like going in a positive direction, like I want to make this cat like a human because humans are cool, or I might say I'm going to make this cat like a human and destroy stuff because humans suck. So they might be doing that. Or they might be comparing and contrasting humans with non-humans. Hyperbole is used for exaggeration for different reasons, just depends. A lot of times it's used for humor, but it's also used for irony and making people mad, which is the best thing to do. And then sensory imagery, and this is not an all-exhaustive list, this is just what an author might do. Depending on the sense, so if it's looking, or they just want you to focus on what the sense is. So you might say like an author focuses on seeing things because, I don't know, you got to come up with something. I have to have an example there, but yeah. Okay, let's talk some weird and cool figurative language. So a lot of these questions here are going to be answered here. So we got, I don't remember which one's first though, so I'll see. I think I'll start with epic simile actually, because I don't think I have that in this. Okay, so epic simile. What is an epic simile is the question, and it is a simile that is, it's kind of like an extended metaphor where it's used, oh man, like in an epic poem too. So an epic simile, like, you know what? Trying to remember the example now. I had an example in my head and now I don't remember it. So I'm going to go back to that question. Sorry. So I'll go back to your epic simile in just a moment, because I do not want to get it wrong and I don't want to say the wrong thing. So let's go to the other ones. Okay. I'm going to go to the ones that you guys have already asked about this. I'll go back to these. All right, Zeugma. No, I'm going to go back to epic simile. Okay, epic simile. So it's a comparison yeah, so I was right. It's an extended simile. It's just a longer one. So it's used like several lines. Instead of just saying something is like Hercules is like a rock, then it would have this whole poem where Hercules is described to be like a rock. So it's like an extended metaphor, except it's an extended simile, and usually in epic poetry. Okay, good. I was right. It's okay. I get distracted by adorable kitties too. Got a good question here. And so do epic similes often appear in the exam? I've only seen, no, I mean, it may, again, it's like probably about as long as an epic, that phrase itself, I've only seen it on one example in what I have given my classes. So I wouldn't say it appears as often as like a regular simile. Good question. Haha, adorable kitty. I went a little Star Trek here, though. You're welcome, as always. Okay, so let's get to the question of what is Zeugma? Haha, here we go. So, Zeugma is a figure of speech, and the example is going to make more sense than the definition, probably. is a figure of speech that uses a word or phrase to describe two or more items in a list in different ways. So often when you use Zeugma, it's going to change the part of speech of the word that is being used again, or the original, or it's going to change the definition of the word. So again, that definition is like, okay, cool, what's an example? So for example, and this is why Riker's on here, you are free to execute your laws and your citizens as you see fit. So what it's doing there is a sentence that uses that word execute, or just a word, to change a definition, usually for like a humorous effect or an ironic effect or something to go, oh. So in this case, execute is used in two different definitions. So execute your law, like to make it happen, or to execute your citizens, as in to kill them. So again, it's going for that kind of like wow factor, like, whoa, what are you saying? Or maybe it's criticizing them. So yeah, and it was Riker who said that. Any Trekkies in here? I love Star Trek. It makes me happy. Cats and Star Trek, man. Perfect day. Get a cat in your lap, watch some Star Trek. Awesome. Anyway, yes, good. At least one of you. And another example is she stole his wallet and his heart that fateful day. So stealing, metaphorically stealing your heart and literally stealing your wallet. So that's Zeugma. You've probably seen it several times. Now you're going to see it everywhere. I love Zeugma, it's fun. I love most of these, actually. Okay, let's see, what do we got? We'll skip over that unless you want to, if we have time, we'll do, okay, here's syllogism. So the question is, and I've gotten a lot of these, what is a syllogism? So a syllogism is a logical argument that uses two premises to arrive at a conclusion. You're going to see this if you remember back to like Math 2. I think that's what it's called now. Geometry is what I knew it as. Is you got like if A then B, if B then C, so if A then C. So you have two things that's going to arrive at a conclusion. So in literature, that's the same thing of what it is. It's just using words instead of letters or numbers. So here's an example. If all cats are adorable, premise 1, and all kittens are cats, premise 2, then all kittens are adorable too. So you make a conclusion based on two premises. Does syllogism appear a lot in the exam? I have not seen it appear a lot, but I did see it on that one exam, so here's what it is. So if you even have the basic idea of what a syllogism is, then you can at least say whether something is or is not a syllogism on a multiple choice question. Another example here is, if all candy is delicious and chocolate is candy, then chocolate is also delicious. So again, you've got premise 1, candy is delicious, chocolate is candy, premise 2, then you make a conclusion based on those two premises. Here's where it actually appears in literature, an example. So there's an example in The Merchant of Venice. This is where the syllogism does not work. It's called a syllogistic fallacy. Does it appear a lot in the exam? I have not seen it appear a lot in the exam, but who knows? Doesn't mean it won't appear. So if you have basic thing here, many men desire Portia and want to marry her. That is a basic premise. And everyone who wants to marry Portia has to pick between three caskets that have like these puzzles on them. And that reads, who chooses me shall gain what many men desire. A suitor made a syllogistic fallacy by assuming that many men desire Portia, so therefore it must be correct. But that's not correct, because many men also desire other things like wealth and power. Ooh, good question. Okay, so yes, so that's a syllogism. And beautiful question, here we go. I'm going to combine those two. So figurative language devices are only used in the free response questions. No, they're used everywhere. And they will specifically usually appear in Q1 and Q2, and then you will still use them in Q3 as much as you can, but they may not give you that list of things because they don't have a specific example of the book they're giving you. And it will definitely appear in the multiple choice. It may not appear as much as, I think you will use it more frequently in the free response questions. That's usually how it goes. You are welcome. Okay, so that's syllogism. It's just an argument based on two things. Let's see. Oh yes, here's some more stuff. So I'm going to get to the question of what is a pastoral. So conceit, pastoral, apostrophe. So those are three things that these are all things that have appeared in the exam at some point, even if it's just saying, is this a conceit? So a conceit is just a new comparison between two unlike things. It's a metaphor that you haven't heard before. It's not a cliche. It's usually something really weird. So here's a weird kind of freaky example. And this is by John Donne. So it was done back in like, I don't remember what year he was writing. It's really long ago. The Flea is a conceit. It is a poem that compares a flea to intercourse, like being bitten by a flea to like relations with somebody. So it's like, that's not something you'd normally do. That's not normally a comparison that people make. So it's considered a conceit. It's kind of a perverse poem. If you ever read it, I wonder if anyone's read it. It's interesting. So that's an example. A pastoral is a poem set in an idealized country landscape or setting. So, or if it's used in an adjective like a pastoral poem, it's just describing. It's like describing something rural or country. So that's all pastoral is. A lot of times it's used in art as well. So if you've seen like pictures of like shepherds out in a field, that's a pastoral piece of art. You can kind of think of, this is the way I think of it. I think of pasture and pastoral. That's the way I've always remembered it. So pasture poem, something set out in the middle of the field. And then, so I'll go ahead and say I answered that one. And then finally, we have apostrophe, which this one has, again, these have all appeared. And this has all appeared in multiple choice, is a work written to a non-real person or abstract idea. So in this case, the apostrophe is not, it's spelled the same way that the little thing on your apostrophe S. But if it's saying like, this is an apostrophe, like this piece of literature is an apostrophe, it's something written to like I said, non-real person or abstract idea. So if you've read Macbeth, a really good example of that is his dagger speech. He has an entire soliloquy where he talks to a dagger he sees in front of him, but it's not really there. Or if you're writing like Ode to Love, it's an apostrophe. It's written to somebody or something. It's not real. So that's apostrophe. Ooh, I don't have any new questions. Oh my goodness. And we have, I believe that is it. Wow. Ooh, wonderful. Okay, so the question is here. Yes, please keep asking questions or else I'm going to tell you, actually, we'll just end. But I want to keep getting questions. Okay. So, question is, would a reference to a religious figure be considered an apostrophe? Usually it's a concept. I would say a reference to a religious figure is going to be an allusion most of the time, like alluding to something in the Bible or something to mythology. So, let's see, yeah, apostrophe. It could be, but most of the time it's done like with, I would layer on the side of saying that's an allusion or like, yeah, because a poem to Jesus is not considered an apostrophe, I don't think. We'll just say that. You're welcome. Let's see. Ooh, lots and lots of questions here. Okay. Let's see. The question is, do old texts appear often? Yeah, they do. So you'll usually get a pretty good mixture of older texts and newer texts. Just to get all the whole gamut of Western literature. So yeah, they're going to appear. So the more you read, the more you practice with different, like I would say, you get a good mixture of what you're reading from modern texts, because they've been using a lot more modern texts recently too. So it's not like everything's going to be old Shakespeare. Love Shakespeare anyway, but of course I'm an English teacher. But you should get used to reading some of the older texts to what I like to call the thou poems. That's where they are. But they've been using more modern poetry as well. So yeah, expect to see a mixture. Ooh, okay, good question with the apostrophe. So the question is, so if you're referencing like the death or the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, would that be an apostrophe? Oops, I didn't answer that. So would that be an apostrophe, like referencing that? Yes, in that case, that's something like that's not the figure itself. I'm not saying that like it would never be that, but that would be an example of apostrophe, something that's like a concept more. Good question. Okay. Ooh, wonderful question here. Yeah. So the question is, how can we prepare to do well in an old text passage multiple choice? So good thing, again, this is March. Read as much as you can. Read, and if you have trouble reading text, like you have a lot of trouble reading Shakespeare, or you have a lot of trouble reading a lot of times contemporary stuff around that, or even, I always say Shakespeare, but there are a lot of things written in the Victorian period, like a little over 100 years ago, are also a little bit difficult. So if you have a lot of trouble doing that, it is okay to look up a summary to see if you're getting it right. What's not okay is replacing the text itself with the summary. What you want to do, the best way to do that is to read through that text and then go back and see what you understood. Or in the case of Shakespeare, reading the text and then watching an example of it. There's a lot of free stuff online. or you can get things from your library too that will like have plays or goes, well, you can't go see a play now, but you can look at one like online. Yeah, reading as much as you can and just helping yourself with those, with looking at summaries. Ooh, and you are welcome, always. And I have two questions that are very similar here. So I have recommend any old text to read and kind of similar. Should we read classics only? Do you have any recommendations? I have so many recommendations. So I'll start with recommend any old text to read. Again, I always tell people to read at least one Shakespeare. Pick one that you like. Look at summaries and see like a synopsis. I always read the summary of the Shakespeare play before I read a new one, because even I'm like, what is this about? So look at that summary. Look at one that you're actually interested in. And if you're like, really like, just give me one, read Macbeth. That has one plot line and it is pretty easy to follow. Easy as in Shakespeare easy. That one has some good examples too. You can find some stuff online. Older text to read too. I have a list. I have a huge list, and I'll put that in the notes as well, of texts that have appeared on the AP exam that is a good mixture of older texts and newer texts, like ones that are written in the last 30 years versus ones that were written like 500 years ago. So it's a good, or no, there's some ancient texts on there too. Read some Greek mythology too, like the Iliad or the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a good one to read, especially if you like I guess like really weird stuff happening. The Odyssey is really fun. Ooh. I'm just gonna like kind of answer this, but okay. So I have an apronym and unonym. I have actually not come across those, so I like that. Unonym sounds like something that sounds nice because U has that what do you call it? It's a stem on it that means nice sounding or like good, you. So I am not sure. I don't know why. I want to look that up in a second. That is a good question. So I'm not really, I don't know. So I admit that. But if I find out and I'm back on here and you come back and I remember it, I will explain it. But I've not heard that one. Sorry, I wasn't as good with that one. Okay. You're welcome. I know I wasn't particularly helpful with that. But now I really want to look it up. Do y'all have any other questions for me? Yeah, that's what I think. Like you is like nice sounding. So maybe were they opposites of each other? One of the other things you can do, yeah, nim is the word. One of the other things you can do to help yourself with the vocabulary journal is to look up stems like you. So let's say you don't know something. You can at least know like parts of words that you do know, like you may have studied for biology or something like that. And then so you're like, you can make an educated guess. This is normal stuff too, about what a word might mean or what a new term is. I have a question here. What would be considered a literary technique? Those are also used pretty interchangeably with literary device and literary technique. So it's pretty much the same as anything like, again, irony or figurative language or all those things. You are welcome. That's what I used to do with my kids. I make them look at stems and they hated it, but then they're like, that was the most helpful thing I ever did in class. So I always teach stems and tell people to do that, but it's a really good one. Okay. All right. Well, stems. Okay, last question. There we go. Cool. So a stem, when I'm talking about what are stems? So stems are pieces of words that are like, so for example, you have, I'm going to type it in here. So euphony. There it is in there. So you have two stems in here. You got you, which is, it means good. And this is something you can look up. You can just, if you type vocabulary stems into Google, you can find huge lists of these things. So you have you, which is good. And then you have phon or phony, which means sound, which I don't know why that didn't type in there. That was weird. And so if you know these stems, even if you've never seen the word euphony before, if you know what those words mean, then you can put those together and make up the definition. So euphony means something that is euphonic or it has euphony, it means it has good sound. So the more you study those, the more you kind of know you can get unfamiliar terms. Word stems are fun. You can have Greek stems, you can have Latin stems, you can have all kinds of stems. So yeah, so that's a really good way to look at things you don't know. All right, y'all. I believe that is it. Again, there are some terms on here like synecdoche, metonymy, things I didn't get to that are on this PowerPoint. You can always go back to doing it and looking at it in the live stream notes tomorrow. But until then, I will see y'all later. Thank you so much for coming out on your Monday night and spending time with me to talk about literary devices, because this is what I would want to do on a Monday. So hopefully you did too. You are so welcome. Thanks y'all for coming. And you guys have a lovely, lovely week. I'll see you next time. Bye.